Hey everyone, Armor Gaming here. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is Arcade. How can you defeat a machine that harbors so much knowledge about games? Arcade knows all the tactics and has been storing the best games by pro players for years. So if you're going to fight against it, be creative. Now I have to say, Arcade, his design to me, it's one of the best that's ever been released. And it's specifically the face he has on the screen. I just love it. Like, you can clearly tell it's a baby. You can tell it's a child. It has that like one tooth there. It's awesome. And then you move on to the teenage years and his face just becomes really bland. It's awesome. And then you move over to his adult years and basically his eyes just spread out more. So I love the design. It's a pretty cool thing. It's cool that it has the Monster Legends logo and everything. So design alone, I love this monster. But now let's get into analysis. For power, we have 3,476. Now, when you talk about the whole game, about every single monster, this is a really strong, high power. However, it must be pretty difficult being a metal monster, because if you don't have a power of over 3,500 in the metal category, you're technically considered weak. Out of the 14 metal monsters, having this power of 3,476, it actually ranks him in number 8 as of the time recording this video. So again, it's an impressive power. However, for metal monsters, it's not that impressive. On the other hand, his life comes in at 30,461. And this is definitely one of the higher lives for metal monsters. It's actually the second highest stat. So the only monsters that have a higher life than him are Metalhead and Draza, and they both have the exact same life. So you can either say Arcade has the second highest life or the third highest life, whichever you want to say it. But you should also know that DAD unit, or Dad unit, he actually has the same life as Arcade. So you can tell this monster is pretty darn tanky. But what's even more impressive is his speed of 3,465. Of all the metal monster speed, this is actually the fastest. Now I'm not saying he is the fastest, because actually Annihilator R2 and Stinger 1, they have the exact same speed, so there's that. But still, in terms of just the stat, the speed stat alone, this is the fastest for metal monsters. And actually overall, it's just a really good speed stat to have. So Arcade is a metal monster, therefore his weakness is magic, and his trait is immune to magnetizing. And just really quickly, because I've been mentioning this in other monsters, the GPM does show up as 244. So this monster has already been released, he's in the maze. So the best we can do is hope that this is true, and we're gonna have more monsters with 244 GPM. And actually, before I move on, I have to talk about this monster's design again. So I mentioned speed, he's one of the fastest monsters. What's really funny to me about this is look at his adult form. He has hands, right? He's one of the fastest monsters and he has hands. He has like 2 legs in the back and 2 hands in the front. But when you look at his childhood form and his teenage form, he actually used to have wheels. Wouldn't you think that he'd be faster when he had wheels than when he has only hands as an adult? Like, to me, I just found that funny. This had nothing to do with analysis, but I just wanted to throw that out there. But anyways, moving back to analysis, we have Coins Rain and Invaders for his default skills. And like usual, there's nothing too special about these skills. You know, you have the usual 25, 30 damage, 13 stamina, no cooldown, okay, great. But his special skill, You Lose, deals very heavy metal damage to all enemies, may possess all targets. So it gives rebooted, it's basically AoE possession. So not only does it deal crazy damage, 60, it also gives possession. Now the only monster currently immune to possession for metal monsters is Stinger and of course Timerion. So overall, definitely a really good skill. Moving on to skills group 2, we have a skill called Continue. Deals very heavy special damage, removes 50% of stamina from target, requires cooldown. 50 damage, 28 stamina, 1 turn cooldown. That's pretty good in my opinion. It's nice that it's special element, so you don't need to worry about that metal on metal attack. And removing 50% of stamina from the enemy target, which no one is immune to stamina drain, that's really helpful, so it's definitely a good skill. We have a skill called Galaga, which actually seems to be really standard in a lot of metal monsters, specifically a lot of metal attackers. But even some monsters that aren't metal attackers, they seem to have a skill like this. And what it is, it's basically a metal based attack. It's an AoE that does 45 damage. So if you're running Arcade as an attacker, this is a skill you would want to run. Moving on, we have a skill called Triple Dragon, deals heavy metal damage, may stun target. 50 damage, 28 stamina, 1 turn cooldown, and it stuns. So this skill is good because it's your standard stun skill. Now in terms of metal monsters, Metalhead and Draza are immune to stun, Timerion of course is also immune to stun, and there's lots of metal monsters that have hardened, so there's a 20% chance you won't land the stun. But however, having an immobilizing skill, a deny skill, is always good to have because you never know when it could come in handy. And moving on, we have a skill called Game Over. Game Over deals very heavy special damage, it removes 70% of stamina from the target, and it recovers 70% of stamina. It requires a 2-turn cooldown, it's 60 damage, 34 stamina. Now in my opinion, this is probably the best move he has, and it's the best for a number of reasons. Now one of the good things about this skill is that it is special based. So like with Continue, you don't need to worry about that metal on metal attack, and it's really strong, 60 damage. Again, when you keep in mind that this monster has a really high power, and especially if you add strength runes, this skill can potentially one-hit the enemy, which is awesome. But even if you fail, even if you don't have strong enough strength runes to one-hit the enemy, they're still going to lose 70% stamina, and no matter what, you're still going to recover 70% stamina, which means you'll never have to waste a turn to recharge. So for that reason, this skill is good. And moving over to Y-type, Y-type deals low metal damage to all enemies, may magnetize all targets, 30 damage, 35 stamina, 3-turn cooldown. It is of course an AoE magnetized. So I mentioned previously, lots of metal monsters, specifically lots of metal attackers, tend to have this skill combined with a skill like Galaga, which is 45 damage, and to me it seems really repetitive and played out. They're doing the same with just about every metal monster. You do AoE magnetization, and then you do a strong 45 damage metal based AoE, and of course because they're all magnetized, you're basically going to win with just 2 hits, and you honestly don't even need to have the best strength runes. You could probably have 2 really decent strength runes and do that combo and you'll win in 2 turns. So that's definitely an option you can run with Arcade if you want to. However, if you're tired of just doing that and want to try something else, you can look at his other skills. So lastly, we have the King of Fighter, and the King of Fighter deals very heavy metal damage, may stun the target. So it's an increased version of his previous skill, Triple Dragon, and this is 65 damage, 31 stamina, 2-turn cooldown. So similar to Game Over, this skill has the potential to one-hit just about any single monster, except maybe a monster that is also metal. Because it's 65 damage, because this monster has a high power, and because you're going to give strength runes, it's easy enough to see how this monster can just about one-hit whatever monster they're choosing to battle. Now just in case the enemy doesn't die, at least you still have a chance to stun them, if they're not immune to stun, if they don't have harden. So even if you don't take them out, if you don't have the best strength runes, you can still stun them, so I really like that skill for that reason. So anyways, as for what skills to run, I think I would recommend Y-type, Galaga, the King of Fighter, and Game Over if you're doing an offensive build. And of course that's just because Y-type and Galaga, it's an easy combo. Like you can realistically do it with any metal monster, and it's just those 2 skills alone are really all you need. And for runes, it's pretty simple, 2 strength runes and a speed rune and you're good to go. Now if you're bored of the whole AoE magnetize and then strong 45 damage metal attack, you could mix it up and try something out. Like I said, there's plenty of metal monsters that have this whole Y-type Galaga kind of combo, so you don't need to do it with this monster if you don't want to. So the 2 skills I do definitely recommend you run are the King of Fighter and Game Over. And then honestly, it really goes to you what you want to do. I think I would do the King of Fighter, Game Over, Continue, and Galaga to have that strong 45 damage AoE. And honestly, I would say just make this monster to your liking. There's so many metal attackers, and again, I just have to reiterate, that whole Y-type Galaga combo, just about every single metal monster, they seem to be able to do it, so there's no reason to do it for every single metal monster. For runes, I think at the end of the day, this monster is still an attacker. Like even if you don't run this combo, just looking at King of Fighter and Game Over, I imagine if you had a level 10 rune, a level 10 strength rune, you could potentially one-hit most enemies just with these 2 skills alone. Yeah, it's not an AoE, but at least like one main monster, you'll probably take them out. But since I'm assuming most people don't have level 10 strength runes, run 2 strength runes and a speed. If you really want to, you could even do a life rune to make them just extremely tanky, extremely hard to beat. Now before I end the analysis, I actually have to talk a little more about this skill, Game Over. I mentioned that this is probably his best skill, and the reason it's his best skill is because I'm just thinking outside of the box here. This is something you could do, not something I'm recommending everyone does, but it's just something you should potentially think about when looking at monsters and their skills. So I already mentioned, let me go back up, his speed, this makes him tied to be the fastest metal monster in the game. So what does that mean? That means that he's faster than every other metal monster except Annihilator R2 and Stinger 1. Now, Annihilator R2 and Stinger 1, they are not Deny monsters whatsoever, right? The Deny monsters for Metal Monsters tend to be Mechamancer, who does his AoE possession, Metalhead, he can be a Deny monster because he has AoE stun, and Timerion typically is who we see. And Timerion, it really sucks when he hits you with cooldowns activated, especially because lots of metal monsters tend to have high cooldowns on their attacks. Now, keep it in mind again, he has the fastest speed. That means that if you and your opponent go runes for runes matched, if you had level 10 runes and he had level 10 speed runes, if you were exactly matched, your arcade would go before his metal monster, right? So then we go back to this skill, game over. But even before going to game over, if you're going against a Mechamancer, again, all speed runes, like match runes, you're basically just comparing space stats, and you would go before his Mechamancer, and you could immobilize him with King of the Fighter, right? And then your attacker can do whatever, and so on. That's just one way to think about it. This is again, if you do all speed runes. Now, specifically for going up against Timerion, I want to look at this skill called Game Over. Game Over takes away 70% of stamina. So let me pull out my calculator. The standard stamina for monsters is 140. You multiply that by 0.3 because that's all the stamina that's going to remain once you've drained 70% of the stamina, and you get 42. That means the monster will be left with 42 stamina. So we move over to Timerion, and look at that, cooldowns activated, the skill we worry about a lot, it costs 55 stamina. So that means if you're doing all speedruns on your arcade and you're doing all speedruns on Timerion, and you start off the match, you're essentially immobilizing Timerion from doing his cooldowns activated attack. Now of course he can still do loop damage, he can still do space time or stop time, but you've at least stopped him for at least one turn from doing cooldowns activated. So that's just something to think about when putting runes on the monster. I know we tend to develop this way of thinking, whereas like a monster is only a deny monster, so I put all 3 speed runes on him, or an attacker is only an attacker, so I have to put 2 strong strength runes or all 3 strength runes, and that's what his purpose, to attack. I want you guys to start thinking outside the box. Specifically for arcade, this is potentially something you could do when going up against an enemy Timerion. You can run your arcade with all speed runes and use them to immobilize the enemy Timerion. Now I'm not saying that's what I personally recommend you do, but I just want you guys to kind of open your mind and just start exploring the different possibilities. Don't just see a monster and say, this monster's purpose is only an attacker, there are better attackers, so for that reason I don't like this monster. No, that's not it. Like there's so many different ways that monsters can be utilized, kind of like how I just did with arcade and giving them all speed runes and using them as a way to immobilize Timerion before you can do cooldowns activated. Now of course you might be thinking that's not the best, and I mentioned this in one of my speed versus life discussion videos. Sometimes it's not really about whether you have speed runes versus life runes versus strength runes. Sometimes it really comes down to the level of speed runes. So of course I said if you and your opponent were to have the same speed runes, arcade would go before Timerion. What you may not realize is, potentially if you had 3 level 9 speedruns, you might even go before your enemy who has 3 level 10 speedruns, just because this base speed of arcade is a lot faster than Timerion, so that can potentially help you out. You would not need 3 level 10 speedruns to be faster than an enemy Timerion, just because of your base speed being faster. So with all that being said, like always, you can run Y type, Galaga, and then King of Fighter, game over, give your monster some strength runes, and then he's just an attacker. If you maybe want to try something else, go ahead and try something else. I personally am going to be doing the King of Fighter, Game Over, Continue, and Galaga, and that's basically going to conclude my analysis. I'm not really going to leave you guys with a perfect skill set because there really isn't one for this monster. Just do what you think is best for you. And like always guys, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. Make sure to comment below who you want me to analyze next week. And don't you guys ever stop dreaming, and don't you guys ever stop pursuing your passions.